Number 2, sell it in the right way. We have a rule for this too. Right? We call this one the lingerie rule. Right? What does that mean? Personalize the experience, help the customer find their way in the store, explain product differences, show them that you care. Explain you get what you pay for. Educate that customer to appreciate the value they're receiving. You'd almost think this was a pharmacy, wouldn't you? Well, imagine it's a lingerie store. Here's a scenario. It's Christmas Eve and I have to shop. And I decide to myself that it's time for me to play the ace in the hole, the trump card, the thing I've resisted doing for all of these years. I now find myself confronted with desperation, and so I say, I'm going to buy my wife some lingerie. Now I know my wife won't be happy with Walmart quality lingerie. So I go to some small independent lingerie shop in my hometown. And I walk in, and what's the first thing I do? Well, I look at the floor. Men always look at the floor in lingerie shops because we don't want to look around. They might think we're perverts. Now, the sales staff in the store have been so well trained, so well indoctrinated to competing against Walmart that what do? Well, they come over and they introduce themselves to me. And they discover I've never been in the store before. And so they don't just offer, they insist. They insist on taking me on a little tour. And so we start in the bargain basement corner of the store. We work our way up one wall. We work our way across the back wall. We get halfway down the third wall. We are now 15 minutes into my personal living hell. But it gets worse because now she decides it's time for some customer education. And so she reaches on the rack and she grabs a garment and she holds it out like this and she says, "Now, Mr. Wong, I know this must look like every other garment I've shown you so far today, but I assure you, Mr. Wong, it is not. This is a cut above. It may look like every other garment because, Mr. Wong, design is just one small part of what makes a lingerie item special. A much bigger part is the material and how it feels on the skin. But look, Mr. Wong," she says, "don't take my word for it. Here, you can feel it for yourself." I don't want to feel it for myself. But at this point, 15 minutes into my personal living hell, what do I say? Fine, wrap it, I'll take it, just let me get out of here. And the moment that happens, this woman has just committed the 3 cardinal sins of retailing. Number 1, she's made me uncomfortable. Number 2, worse yet, she just spent 15 minutes of her labor time and labor cost making me unhappy. And number 3, worst of all, she just left a whack of money on the table, didn't she? Because if she'd stopped for a minute and instead of asking herself, how do I sell him lingerie? If she had stopped and thought about the Viagra rule and asked the question, what's the problem he's facing? It's Christmas Eve, it's almost noon, he's standing in a puddle of sweat looking down at his feet. What do we do for this gentleman? Well, I'm from Montreal, so maybe that has something to do with it. But I tell you, I lived a lot of places. Most of those places, man sets foot in a lingerie shop, odds are he's not there to browse. We have a motivated shopper, don't we? And what does he want? He wants to get in and out of the store as quickly as humanly possible with a gift, card enclosed, wrapped, price tag removed, and a promise that she can take it back the next day if it doesn't fit or she doesn't like it. But since nobody told that to these clerks, they tried to sell me lingerie. Instead, what could they have done? Well, it's Christmas Eve. Take him to the highest price corner of the store, show him a garment and say, here's something every woman would love, but she'd never buy for herself. Buy it. Take it home. You'll have a very Merry Christmas. Sometimes less is more, but you won't get to there unless you are asking yourself the question, not what am I doing, but what's the problem I'm solving that's bringing this person to me. The reason why that's so important is that when you think about managing your costs, managing costs is essential if you want to give the customer lower prices, because cost reduction must come before price reduction. Costs break down into two types, good costs and bad costs. Good costs are anything that the customer looks at and sees as creating a tangible value for them. So if I'm manufacturing a car for sale in Florida, if over and above the cost of that car, I spend $500 to put an air conditioning unit in that car. I don't need an air conditioning unit to make it a car. But if I spend it, is that a good cost or a bad cost? It's a good cost, isn't it? In fact, if I don't have air conditioning, they may not even buy the car. So we'll spend that $500. Why? Because we're going to get it back from the customer. We're going to get it back from them in the form of higher prices. We're going to get it back from them in the form of better patronage. But let's suppose I'm spending 50 cents ordering that air conditioning system. 50 cents placing the order. Good cost or a bad cost? It's an essential cost, isn't it? I mean, you got to order the product. But when did you ever hear a customer walking into a store and saying, show me the car from the company with the best ordering service? See, when the customer looks at that cost, the customer says, you know what, folks, that's your cost. I don't derive any value from that. You do that for your convenience. That's why we call these things cost centers. If we can get the cost of that bad cost down, if we can reduce that ordering cost because we have automated reordering, because we have better inventory control, because we've taken the time to study the inflow and outflow of product from our back office and therefore know at what season we use how much product in what volumes, all of a sudden we can reduce that bad cost, and when we do, we can then take the cost savings and we can reallocate it to giving the customer more of what they want. And when we do that, we are now becoming what we call higher levels of productivity. We are now firing on all cylinders because we're getting higher prices, we're getting better sales, we're getting lower costs, and with that, the ability to provide lower prices. And that's a formula, a surefire formula for higher levels of profitability. This is the principle known as lean manufacturing. This is the same principle that the Japanese car companies used to undermine the efforts of Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors. The notion was, I don't mind spending money as long as I'm spending it on things the customer will reward me for. This is the same formula that you have to use against big box. Why? Because big box has shown a consistent willingness to invest in technology that most of you can't afford. Right? It's really that fundamental. Get the cost out of your back office. Deal with suppliers who will give you the best possible order fulfillment processes. Get those bad costs out of the system. Look at your back of store operation. Ask yourself, how efficiently are we using our space? You know, have we simply got a whole bunch of air on top of packages in our shelves because product doesn't come in standardized packs? Well, all of that air you pay for in the form of rent, don't you? All of a sudden, you start to understand why people are now having these different shelving units on tracks. We're all trying to maximize our use of our square footage. Why? Because it's a really bad cost. And if I can just reduce it, I can give the customer more time. I can give the customer better service. I can give the customer better everything without having to raise the price in the process.